Welcome to Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com, the show where we explore key moments from the history of conflict, from ancient battlefields to modern warfare. This is episode 40, the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad was never meant to be a long battle. In the summer of 1942, Hitler's strategy shifted from the failed drive on Moscow to a push south toward the Caucasus oil fields. The plan, called Operation Blue, split Army Group South into two prongs. One drove toward the oil, the other marched along the Don and toward the Volga to secure the northern flank. Sitting astride that river was Stalingrad, a city of factories and river docks that mattered for transport, industry, and morale. The name alone made it politically impossible for the Soviets to concede. What began as a German attempt to secure a riverbank turned into a grinding test of will that lasted from late August 1942 to early February 1943, and changed the course of the war. The German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus, supported by elements of the 4th Panzer Army and strong Luftwaffe units, reached the outskirts in late August. On the 23rd, the Luftwaffe bombed the city so heavily that entire districts became seas of rubble. The raids killed thousands of civilians and crushed buildings into jagged shells. Ironically, this damage made the city more defensible. Tanks struggled in the ruins, lines of sight were short, and cellars and factory halls became ready-made strongpoints. On the Soviet side, the High Command formed the Stalingrad Front under Andrei Yeremenko. The city itself was entrusted to the 62nd Army, led by General Vasily Chuikov, and the 64th Army, led by General Mikhail Shumilov. Reinforcements, ammunition, and medics flowed across the Volga under constant artillery and air attack. Barges and small craft crossed at night or in fog, and many never made it, but enough did to keep the defenders alive. Soldiers often stepped off the boats and straight into combat. The Volga was both a lifeline and a killing ground. Urban combat in Stalingrad was close, brutal, and relentless. Chuikov pushed his units to get as close to the Germans as possible, sometimes within grenade range, which blunted German artillery and air power. Battles raged over landmarks that became infamous. Mamayev Kurgan, the commanding hill above the city, changed hands repeatedly and was churned into a moonscape of craters and corpses. The factory district on the northern side became a line of strongholds: the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Barricadi ordnance works, and the Red October steel plant. These complexes were vast, full of workshops, gantries, and thick walls that turned every corner into an ambush. Within them, units fought for rooms, stairwells, and even individual machine bays. One apartment block, later known as Pavlov's house, was fortified by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a small group of soldiers. With overlapping fields of fire and disciplined use of limited ammunition, they held out against repeated assaults for weeks. Snipers also played a significant role. The most famous was Vasily Zaitsev, whose tally and tactics boosted morale. The larger truth is a little less cinematic. Hundreds of trained sharpshooters on both sides hunted officers, machine gunners, and observers and slowly bled the enemy's fighting strength while spreading fear and caution. For the Germans, progress came at a terrible cost. Assault engineers with flamethrowers cleared buildings room by room. Stuka dive bombers hammered suspected strongpoints, only to find that the front line had shifted a few yards, and the attack hit empty space. Tanks tried to nose through streets clogged with rubble, only to be trapped by anti-tank rifles at close range. The front was sometimes a wall, sometimes a hallway. Gains were measured in meters, not miles. The broader context mattered too. While the Sixth Army ground its way through the city, its flanks along the Don River were held by Axis allies, including Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian formations that were brave but thinly spread, short of anti-tank weapons, and not prepared for a full Soviet assault. Soviet planners saw the opportunity. Throughout the autumn, the Stavka built reserves to strike those flanks, accepting that the 62nd Army would bleed to buy time inside the city. On the 19th of November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a double envelopment that hit north and south of Stalingrad. The freezing steppe and driving snow did not slow the assault. The weaker Axis units on the flanks collapsed under the pressure of tanks and infantry. Within days, Soviet spearheads met near Kalach on the Don, west of the city. The Sixth Army, along with parts of the 4th Panzer Army and support units, was encircled in a pocket around Stalingrad. Estimates of the trapped force vary, but it was roughly 250,000 men, with dwindling fuel, food, and ammunition, and no secure airfields. Inside the pocket, Paulus and his staff calculated the daily tonnage required to keep the army combat capable. It was several hundred tons at a minimum. Hermann Göring told Hitler the Air Force could supply it. It could not. Transport aircraft were too few, the weather too harsh, runways too exposed, and Soviet air and flak too active. Deliveries averaged a fraction of requirements. Food rations were slashed. Ammunition was rationed. Horses were slaughtered for meat. Frostbite and disease spread as the temperatures plunged. Medical supplies ran out. Operations were performed without anesthesia. The pocket became a slow, grinding catastrophe. A relief attempt did come. In December, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched an offensive known as Winter Storm from the southwest. German armoured units advanced to the Mishkova River, close enough that the trapped troops could hear the artillery fire. Paulus requested permission to break out and meet the relief force halfway. Hitler ordered him to stay put. The relief attack stalled as Soviet forces struck elsewhere with Operation Little Saturn against the Italian 8th Army on the Don, threatening to cut off Manstein if he continued to push farther. The chance to rescue the 6th Army disappeared. In January 1943, the Soviets began Operation Ring to deliberately reduce the pocket. Artillery barrages and coordinated assaults chipped away at the perimeter. The pocket split into a northern and a southern sector. The northern group clung to the factory district. The southern group held the city centre and the rail yards. Ammunition was so scarce that machine guns fired single shots and artillery crews waited for massed targets that never came. Units were reduced to handfuls of men, a company on paper that could barely muster a squad. On the 30th of January, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, Paulus was promoted to Field Marshal. The message was obvious. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. The following day, Paulus capitulated to the southern group. 2 days later, General Karl Strecker surrendered the last organized resistance in the north. Around 90,000 exhausted, frost-bitten survivors went into captivity. Only a small fraction would live to return to Germany years later. The Soviet cost was also staggering. Several 100,000 soldiers were killed, wounded or missing, and civilian deaths in the city ran into the tens of thousands. Historians debate the precise numbers, but the scale of loss on both sides is not in doubt. Stalingrad was not simply a hard fight. It was a meat grinder in which entire divisions vanished in rubble, snow, and smoke. Strategically, the destruction of the 6th Army shattered the myth of German invincibility on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht transitioned from a costly advance to an expensive defense. Material losses in men, artillery, panzers, and transport aircraft could not be replaced quickly. The morale shock reached far beyond Germany. Axis partners, especially Romania and Italy, saw their flanks sacrificed and their armies shredded, which strained the alliance and undermined trust. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad provided momentum, confidence, and proof that large, coordinated operations could smash an enemy's operational design. Soviet offensives rolled westward across the Don Basin and the northern Caucasus. In North Africa, the Axis faced defeats at the same time. The war's balance was not fully reversed yet, but the turn had begun. The battle also revealed the strengths and faults of command on both sides. The German doctrine of combined arms, quick maneuver, and flexible tactics had little room to breathe in a shattered city. Hitler's fixation on holding ground and on prestige targets locked the 6th Army into an unwinnable fight. On the Soviet side, the High Command demonstrated an increasing ability to mobilize reserves, employ deception, and coordinate operations across multiple fronts. At the tactical level, Chuikov's insistence on constant pressure and close contact neutralized German advantages in air and artillery, forcing a fight that suited the defenders. Beyond strategy and tactics, the human dimension is unavoidable. Stalingrad's civilians endured months of bombardment, hunger, and cold. Many were evacuated across the Volga, many were not. Families lived in cellars while the streets above became battlefields. For the soldiers, the city's ruins dictated everything: how they moved, fought, ate, and slept. Letters from both sides describe snow falling through shattered roofs, the taste of brick dust in the mouth, and days that blurred together in smoke and fear. After the war, Stalingrad became a pillar of memory. In the Soviet Union, it was presented as the epitome of sacrifice and endurance. The memorials on Mamayev Kurgan, including the immense statue known as the Motherland Calls, reflect that narrative. In the West, historians have debated the feasibility of a breakout, whether Manstein could have established a corridor, and the exact tonnages of the airlift. However, the broad assessment has remained unchanged. Stalingrad halted the German advance, destroyed a major field army, and marked the beginning of a sustained Soviet counteroffensive that would ultimately lead to the defeat of the German forces in Berlin. The Battle of Stalingrad was far more than a struggle for a city. It was the hinge of the Eastern Front, fought across factories, rail yards, hills, and frozen riverbanks under bombardment and snow. It demonstrated how industrial cities could become fortresses, how logistics and command decisions could decide the fate of armies, and how human endurance could hold a line until a counterstroke changed the war's course. In the ruins on the Volga, the balance of the Second World War began to shift decisively against Nazi Germany. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Compact Warfare from compactwarfare.com. If you did, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.